So Dr. Sharma, I'll come to you now. Now, water resilience, as we've established, is sort of a regional scale issue at the end of the day, right? The Bangalore Climate Action Plan is going to soon be finalized at the same time as the second revision of the state action plan is also, kind of going on. State action plan for climate change is going on. Now, how do you get both of these plans to talk to each other or dovetail into each other so that that regional perspective can be brought into the picture?
Thank you very much for that question. And sitting here, when we listen to different people, we move from despair to hope, and again back to despair and hope. And as I have been completely captivated by what is being talked, and I had almost lost myself, and though got lots of clues, because when the state has prepared the state action plan on climate change, state perhaps has not talked about these elements, say water in isolation, because if you look at water, it percolates to everything, including the infrastructure that you generate. And you then from water move on to the discourse as to how the urban areas need to be organized, or what opportunity urban spaces have to provide for water, say suppose percolation, accumulation, its usage and disposal, all of that. The state level action plan is in the nature of a policy direction. It says that this is the situation at present. At conceptual level, we have lots of solutions. We understand those solutions, but we also understand that the solutions are site-specific. You need to plan more specifically as you want to undertake action at a place. So these state-level plans cannot provide for such detailed action, but they do provide a policy direction that they first recognize the problem and say that perhaps in this much of time frame, we would like to go like this. So that has been done at the state level. Now the city level plan that we are finding as part of the C40, which is a fantastic initiative, they inform through the U20 trying to connect to G20 is fantastic. And this plan, which Bangalore is developing itself, I've looked at Bombay plan also, Mumbai plan also. This plan is little more specific because it is at all times limiting itself to, say, city of Bangalore and talking about the agencies which are at the level of Bangalore. But it also struggles as to how coordination happens between all of those at city level. And then we at the state level plan try to think of that at state level, where along with state, you have to engage with Government of India also, because the programs like Amrit, which are fantastic programs, and the additional secretary has talked about them, and you almost then got a sense that government is trying to do everything that is necessary, and you would soon have a good water situation in the country. And of course, they are making that attempt. But as soon as you get into these local levels, you find there are number of stakeholders, and at times they may have their own interests so much built in that it could be opposing. And we have encountered that. In this state, in form of governance, if we talk about, then the state level action plan tries to identify the governance structure in which coordination is an important aspect. And it talks about how coordination could be happening at district level and similarly at the state level. And obviously, it starts from climate change being such an issue that the apex level body is chaired by the chief minister and a council of ministers. And then you come down. But we do have experience by now of various programs that we have implemented and how coordination becomes the most difficult issue. So it appears that alongside government, centrality of which has to be gradually diluted, as he's suggesting decentralization has to be talked about. We have done that in terms of the governance and the politics, because now we have the three tiers government structures, Zilla Panchayat you have, and village level Panchayat you have. So overall, there needs to be a demand from the citizens which should be growing to add compulsion to all stakeholders, and also at local level to try to take care of, say, suppose what Biome does. They have done lots of documentation of the local water bodies, but he says, don't romanticize that. You will still need water, and you would need, because lots of people are living here. Cities do not generate anything of their own. They import everything, be it energy, be it whatever else, including food, and then they consume and produce the byproducts, effluents, pollution, which has to be again dealt with. But he says you have to go far off places. You have to look at Western Ghat forests if you're talking about water security of this state and southern India in general. And he has a point there. So that is the scale at which all of these actions are required. The cities are surviving on the resources that are imported from elsewhere. But alongside that, how can city itself within it create these resources, conserve them, be caring about it, and pay for them, which is an important point, because government, the new water policy that state government has put in place, it imagines that perhaps someday we'll be able to charge for the irrigation water, that being the largest charge on water anywhere in the world, and more so with us. But those are dreams, which we need to see how politically also it matches. So we have all the knowledge that is necessary to deal with the problem we have at hand. But despite that, the human greed, selfishness, and apathy comes into play, and it dilutes things. So we do have a plan. It does have a governing structure. City plan would come. The two should be now in terms, when we talk about Bangalore, within that, we would like to fall back upon that. We would have readily available the agency which is getting it done, and others who have been participating in preparation of this plan. So overall, we have to remain hopeful and keep working and try to evolve strategies which are more site-specific. And then we realize what the difficulties are. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Give a much more granular information about, okay, the water level in this particular cluster of a neighborhood is likely to be more than the others because the terrain level there is lower than the others. So the crowdsourcing is only for that latter part. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
So water is largely managed by the state today. While all of us consume it, we put in energy, effort into trying to draw it out for ourselves. There are huge governance issues around water. You mentioned the Kaveri catchment. Kodagu came pretty close to having a drought this year. They wouldn't be able to draw from it if we do not take charge of governance of the catchment there. My lake, when it gets rejuvenated, the wastewater that arrives at the lake is bypassed and sent to the lake downstream. Right? I do not take responsibility for it. So am I, as a citizen, responsible for consumption and bypass all the wastewater issues? How does governance need to change for water resilience in the coming decades?
Samir, are you directing this to anyone in particular?
Not particularly, but Vishu, you're free to answer.
Sure, Vishwanath, please.
Yeah, so Samir, you frame it well. It's not that I'm against rainwater harvesting or decentralized solutions of the local lake that need to be taken care of, but it need to be taken care of realistically in terms of this solution at a city scale, right? So one of the things that we are doing as citizens here in Bangalore, for example, is being very vocal about protecting our lakes or wetlands, about solid waste and so on and so forth. We're organizing and we're doing a lot around it. I don't think citizens are doing enough to understand what the institutional strengths are. For example, with the Bangalore Water Supply and Sewerage Board, what their weaknesses are, what kind of an institution we need for them to structurally protect all the water in our city, right? Including groundwater, wastewater, rainwater, and the lake water, and so on and so forth. There is, in my opinion, a huge lack of capacity with the institution. There's a lack of human resource capabilities. There's a lack of institutional well-roundedness. As an example, they don't have a single hydrogeologist, so therefore groundwater does not exist for them. They don't have anybody with wetland specialization, so they don't know anything about lakes, which is the way the institution has been created. Not blaming them, but we need to well-round that institution, capacitate that institution, and financially strengthen them. Citizens of Bangalore protest when Belandur and Vartur is in flames or sewage is entering it. But are we willing to pay the true cost for water? And the true cost for water is 95 rupees a kiloliter. I don't see citizens group coming forward to say, look, I will pay my fair share of sewage collection, conveyance, and treatment and hold my institution accountable. That never happens. So there is a human resource, institutional, and financial issue, which is at the heart and the core of how a city will function. And it's at the core of how our cities will manage climate change. And citizens groups now have to mature to engage with institutions and work around strengthening those institutions and holding them accountable, but also capacitating them to be able to do their jobs.
I'm sorry, I was just going to add to that because I agree with that set of points. I think there's a couple of additional pieces. One is, people have to be willing to pay. But I think that there are some incentive design issues in the way our tariff structures are done throughout the country, which is a water utility gets X amount of rupees for supplying water, but it doesn't get anything additional for supplying taking away and treating the wastewater. So if you're a water utility, and all of our water utilities are cash strapped, but their incentive is basically to delay investments in sewerage as much as possible because you're not getting any additional. It's a pure cost center. This is not necessarily the way tariff design is done everywhere else in the world. If you look at a lot of the US utilities, there's a separate wastewater utility which actually gets paid for developing it. And so right now, if I had to change only one thing, I would say that is one thing I would change, which is to see whether if you could make water utilities get additional revenue to take away the water, and how you structure it, there are many, many different ways to do that. The second thing that I would say is what Vikas said earlier, which I thought is worth repeating, which is there's a lot of ambiguities in the way certain policies and regulations are written, which makes it difficult for players to come in and actually do it because they're always afraid that they're going to get slapped with a fine. So one example is on the wastewater reuse side. For players that are engaged in wastewater reuse, there's a lot of ambiguities on what's allowed and what's not allowed because standards are not set, so on and so forth. And to be honest, some of this is done deliberately because when you keep laws vague, then it creates opportunities for rent seeking also. So there are reasons, structural reasons why that happens. We don't like to say it on these diocese, but it's important for us to, that's what our partners on the ground tell us. Resident welfare associations grumble about this. People who are in the private sector who are trying to solution, they grumble about this. So if we have increased clarity in regulations such that you don't leave them deliberately ambiguous and then align incentives better, I think those would help.
Thank you. Since I come from the government, everything is so exciting that you are left thinking all the time. But just one factual thing for your information, for all citizens in this country, the number of people who are serving the population, take example of the state, we are about 6.5 crore, and in the government, we are 5 lakh. Right? You understand how many vacancies are there. I'm talking about institutions, their capacity to respond to what you're saying. If we look at the developed countries, the 7.5% of population. In our case, we are saying less than 1%. They are 7.5% trying to address those public issues. And hence, London can afford, or UK does provide that warning on your doorsteps X number of days in advance. If you look at Scandinavian countries, such percentages between 20 and 25. So in this country, what falls on you, you try to just address it or push it aside. There is reason for everything. So we in government, say suppose my personal experience, I'm not talking on behalf of the government, gradually I have stopped asking question, why does it so happen? Question to me is, it happens like this, now you think what can be done, right? It's question of human psychology and the way we behave. When can we ask question? Who do we ask question? And when we do not ask questions. So all that complexity also comes into this, but climate change is a real issue. We must deal with it.